It was a quiet Sunday morning when I noticed how the house had started to feel too big for me. The walls that once echoed with laughter now stood still, listening only to the sound of my footsteps. I used to wake up early, make breakfast for everyone, and hear my son's voice calling, "Mom, the coffee smells good." But now, the coffee pot stayed half full, and the chair he used to sit in remained empty. Life has a way of shrinking your world when you live alone. You start moving slower, not because you're tired, but because there's no reason to hurry. My son Daniel had moved out years ago, after he married his wife, Melissa. At first, I was happy for them. Melissa seemed polite, gentle, and eager to start a family. I remember thinking she'd be good for him. But with time I began to notice small things. How Daniel called less. How he stopped coming over for Sunday dinners. How the visits on holidays became shorter and shorter. I told myself it was normal, that all children grow up and move on, that I shouldn't hold on too tight. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. Whenever I tried to reach out, Melissa usually answered the phone. She'd say, "Daniel's busy right now, but he'll call you later." Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. Her tone was polite but distant, like a wall carefully built between us. I ignored it for months, even years, telling myself not to imagine things. Still, it hurt. One summer, Daniel came by alone, which surprised me. We sat on the porch with lemonade, and I asked him how married life was. He smiled, but it was that nervous kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He said, "It's good, Mom. You know, married life is a lot of adjustment." I nodded, understanding, but before I could say anything more, his phone buzzed. I saw the name Melissa flash on the screen. He stood up quickly and said, "I have to go, Mom. Melissa needs me." And just like that, the conversation ended. After he left, I sat on the porch until the sun went down. Fireflies lit up the yard, and I thought about the way he rushed off, as if spending time with me had become a duty. I wondered what had changed. Did I say something wrong? Was I too old-fashioned? I used to believe mothers and sons shared a bond that couldn't break, but now I wasn't so sure. Months later, I got sick. It wasn't anything too serious, just a bad fall that left me with a sprained ankle. I called Daniel, hoping he'd come check on me. But it was Melissa who picked up. I told her what happened, and she said, "Oh dear, that's too bad. Daniel's been really busy with work lately. Maybe we can stop by this weekend." The weekend came and went. Nobody showed up. I managed with the help of my neighbor, Mrs. Clark, a kind woman who'd lived next door for 40 years. She brought me soup and sat with me when I felt lonely. When she left each evening, I looked at my quiet house and whispered to myself, "He'll come next week." But next week never came. I started walking again with a cane, slowly but surely. Every step was a reminder of how fragile life had become. I used to think love was something that grew stronger with time. But now I wondered if distance could make it fade like sunlight through dusty windows. It was around Christmas that year when I got a card from Daniel and Melissa. It wasn't handwritten. It was one of those printed ones with their names at the bottom and a photo of them smiling in front of a big tree. They looked happy, but something about the picture made my heart ache. There was no note, no "Love you, Mom." Just "Wishing you a Merry Christmas." I sat by the window holding that card, watching the snow fall outside. I wanted to believe they cared, but a printed card felt so cold, so distant. I thought of the Christmases when Daniel used to help me hang ornaments on our little tree. How he'd pretend to be Santa just to make me laugh. Those memories now felt like another lifetime. One day I decided to call him again. Melissa answered as usual. I asked if Daniel was home. She said, "He's sleeping. Can I take a message?" I hesitated, then said softly, "Just tell him I miss him." There was silence on the other end. Then she replied, "I'll let him know," before hanging up. I never heard back. I tried to stay strong. I volunteered at the church, baked for the neighborhood kids, and spent time tending to my small garden. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the loneliness crept in at night. It sat beside me on the couch when I watched TV, followed me to bed, and whispered doubts in the dark. Then, one spring morning, I received a call from Daniel. It startled me. I hadn't heard his voice in months. He sounded cheerful, almost too cheerful. "Mom, we're coming over today," he said. "Melissa wants to talk to you." My heart lifted. Maybe they wanted to reconnect. Maybe things were finally changing. I cleaned the house, made their favorite casserole, and even put fresh flowers in a vase. When they arrived, Melissa smiled politely, but her eyes stayed cool. She looked around the house as if she was inspecting it. Daniel hugged me briefly, and then sat down. I poured coffee for them and waited for the warmth to return. But instead, Melissa began speaking. "Mom," she said with that careful tone people use when they're trying to sound kind, "Daniel and I have been talking. We think it's time you moved into a smaller place. This house is too big for you." I blinked, not sure I heard her right. "What do you mean?" I asked. She smiled again, the kind of smile that hides something sharp behind it. "Well, it's just... This house needs upkeep and you're not getting any younger. We found a nice little apartment closer to town. It'll be easier for you. Less to worry about." I looked at Daniel, hoping he'd speak up, that he'd say, "No, Mom, don't worry. We'll help you keep this place." But he just sat there, eyes down, nodding slightly. A wave of cold moved through me. "This is my home," I said softly. "Your father and I built this together. Every corner has memories." Melissa sighed. "We understand. But it's really for your own good." I wanted to scream, to tell her she didn't understand at all. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want to embarrass my son. Instead, I asked them to give me time to think about it. They left soon after. The casserole went untouched. I sat at the table long after they'd gone, staring at the 2 untouched plates and the flickering candle between them. My heart felt heavy. For the first time in my life, I felt like a guest in my own family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the house, touching the walls, the photos, the old wooden furniture my husband had built. Every item told a story. Every picture held a piece of me. How could I leave it all behind? I realized then that This wasn't just about moving. It was about being pushed out of the life I had built, piece by piece. And deep down, a quiet voice inside me whispered that this was only the beginning. The days after that phone call stretched long and heavy. I kept replaying Daniel's voice in my head, calm, reasonable, yet distant. It had a kind of finality that made my stomach twist. I tried to convince myself that he was just under pressure, that Melissa might come around, but deep down, I sensed something slipping away. A week later, Daniel came by. He looked tired, older somehow, like worry had carved new lines around his mouth. "Mom," he said softly, "you shouldn't live here alone anymore. The neighborhood isn't the same in this house. It's too much for you to handle." I looked around the living room, at the worn couch where he had once watched cartoons, the wall with pencil marks showing his height through the years. "This house is all I have left, Daniel," I whispered. "It's not too much for me. It's home." He paused, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting around the room like he couldn't bear to look at me. "Melissa found a realtor. She thinks we could sell this place and get you something smaller, easier." The words hit me harder than I expected. I sat down slowly, the air thick between us. "You already found a realtor?" My voice cracked. "Without asking me?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "We're just trying to help, Mom. You shouldn't have to worry about all this paperwork and maintenance." I wanted to believe him, but his eyes, those gentle, boyish eyes I'd once trusted, avoided mine. I could feel a quiet decision already made. "You mean Melissa wants to sell it?" I said softly. He didn't answer, and silence filled the room like fog. Then he turned toward the door. "We'll talk later, okay?" he murmured. "Daniel!" I called out. He hesitated. "Don't let anyone make choices about my life when I'm still here." He nodded faintly, but I could tell my words didn't land. That night I sat at the kitchen table staring at old photographs. Daniel as a child, smiling at his birthday cake, me holding him after his first school play. The memories felt like tiny lights in the dark, but they were flickering fast. A few days later I walked to the library. They still knew me there, the lady who always checked out mystery novels. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I just sat at a computer and looked up legal advice for homeowners. That's how I met Mr. Edwards, a volunteer lawyer with kind eyes and shaky hands. He listened quietly as I explained my situation. When I finished, he nodded. "If the house is in your name alone, no one can sell it without your consent," he said firmly. "Do you have a copy of the deed?" "I do," I replied. "In a drawer at home." He leaned closer. "Then keep it safe. And don't sign anything, not even a friendly-looking form. People mean well, but pressure can make them forget fairness." Before I left, he handed me a small metal box. "Lock your documents in here," he said. "And one more thing. Don't tell them what you're doing. Just protect yourself quietly." His words stayed with me. I went home and placed the deed, insurance papers, and a few other documents inside that box. Then I sealed an envelope and wrote, "In case something happens to me, this belongs to Mrs. Clark next door." She was a widow, too, kind, dependable. That night I couldn't sleep. The clock ticked louder than usual. and every creak in the house felt like a warning. My hands trembled as I checked the locks on the doors. When I finally sat down in bed, I whispered to the empty room, "You're still strong, Evelyn. Don't let them take everything." The next morning, I received a text from Daniel. "I'll respect your decision, Mom. Just remember, Melissa only wants what's best for you." I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I typed back, "I know she thinks that. I just wish she knew what's best isn't always easy." Weeks passed, and the realtor never came. But Melissa's tone changed whenever she called. Less friendly, more cautious, like she was measuring her words. "We just want you safe," she said once, her voice too sweet. "You can't live like this forever." Something inside me cracked open. "I've lived here my whole life," I said quietly. "If I'm not safe here, where would I ever be?" There was silence on the line. Then she said something I'll never forget. Softly, almost like a whisper. "Some things you only learn when it's too late." The call ended. I sat there staring at my reflection in the window. The garden outside was blooming, untouched and wild. It looked peaceful. But I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. That night, I left the porch light on, even though I hadn't done that in years, just in case. The following week passed in a blur of quiet mornings and long, lonely afternoons. I tried to keep busy, watering the plants, baking bread, dusting shelves that didn't need it. But the silence of the house had changed. It wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like someone was watching from the corners just out of sight. One evening, as I sat by the window knitting, headlights flashed across the yard. My heart skipped. A black car pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped out, and for a brief second warmth filled me. Then I saw her, Melissa, getting out from the passenger seat. My chest tightened. When they knocked, I forced a smile and opened the door. "Well, this is a surprise," I said. Melissa smiled too, that same tight, polite smile that never reached her eyes. "We were in the area," she said. "Thought we'd check on you." They came in and sat down. Daniel looked uncomfortable, his fingers tapping on his knee. Melissa's gaze roamed around the living room, taking in the framed photos and the old oak furniture. "You've kept it so traditional," she said softly. "It's like stepping back in time." I just nodded. "Time is what makes a house a home," I replied. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, there's something we should talk about." His voice trembled slightly, but Melissa's expression remained steady, calm, rehearsed. I braced myself. "Go ahead," Melissa leaned forward. "You know, Evelyn, we've been thinking, what if you let us handle your bills and finances for a while, just until you're less stressed? Daniel could take care of your paperwork, and I could make sure things stay organized." It was said gently, almost kindly, but every word carried a quiet pressure. I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of my chair. "I appreciate the thought," I said, "but I'm managing fine." Melissa tilted her head, her smile never faltering. "I understand, but accidents happen. What if you misplace something important, or forget to pay a bill?" Daniel tried to soften the blow. "She's just worried, Mom. You know how things can get complicated." I looked straight at Melissa. "I haven't forgotten a single payment in 40 years, and I don't plan to start now." Her jaw tightened. Just a flicker. "Of course," she murmured. "We're only thinking about what's best for you." After a few awkward minutes, She excused herself to use the restroom, but instead she wandered into the kitchen. I heard drawers opening, papers shifting. My heart thudded. I got up quietly and walked in. She froze when she saw me standing there. "Oh," she said too quickly. "I was just looking for a glass of water." "There's one on the counter," I replied, my voice low. "No need to open drawers." Her eyes narrowed, almost imperceptibly. Then she smiled again, pretending nothing had happened. "Of course. How silly of me." When they left, I locked the door behind them and stood there, trembling. For the first time, I realized how fragile peace could be inside your own walls. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to Daniel. It wasn't angry. It was sad. I told him I loved him. But that love didn't mean blind trust. I slipped the letter into the same metal box with my papers, locked it, and placed the key under my pillow. Days turned into weeks, and their visits became less frequent. But one morning I found an envelope slipped under my front door. Inside was a note written in Melissa's neat handwriting. "Please call us. We're worried. We can't keep doing this if you shut us out." It sounded caring, but I could feel something else between the lines. Impatience, frustration, maybe even control. That evening I decided to call. Daniel answered, relief flooding his voice. "Mom, I'm so glad you called. Melissa's been upset. She just wants to help." "I don't need help," I said softly. "I need peace." He hesitated. "She says you've been forgetful, that you misplaced important papers." My chest tightened. "She was the one opening my drawers, Daniel. Maybe she's confused." There was a pause. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Mom, don't start blaming her. She's only trying to keep you from making mistakes." I couldn't speak for a moment. When I finally found my voice, it came out shaking. "You think I'm losing my mind, don't you?" "Of course not," he said quickly. "But then why does your wife talk about me like I'm a child?" Silence again. Then he muttered, "Mom, please, let's not fight." We ended the call quietly, but I sat there for hours, staring at the wall. The world felt smaller than ever. I missed my son, the boy who used to run barefoot through the yard, who once promised, "I'll always protect you, Mom." Now I wasn't sure if he even believed me anymore. That night, I heard a noise outside, a faint scrape against the porch steps. I went to the window, heart pounding. Nothing but darkness. Still, I left the porch light on again. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, there were faint footprints in the dew, leading up to the porch, and then away again. The footprints stayed with me all day, like a subtle accusation. I tried to focus on small, ordinary tasks, sweeping the floor, arranging the flowers on the windowsill, folding laundry. But every time I passed the front door, my eyes darted to the porch, half expecting to see someone standing there. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I set up a small motion sensor light I had hidden in the corner of the porch. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me feel like I had some control. That evening I waited, listening for the slightest sound. Hours passed. The wind whispered through the trees, and the house felt larger than it had in years, echoing with empty spaces. A few nights later, a letter appeared in the mailbox. No handwriting I recognized. I unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink, sterile, impersonal. Inside was a list of repairs, bills that needed immediate attention, and a note. We are only trying to protect you. Please respond. I sank into my chair. Protection? It felt more like surveillance. My own home had become a place of tension, a battlefield I hadn't consented to enter. I placed the letter in my locked metal box, unopened, and tried to breathe. The next day, I called the local bank to check on my accounts. Everything was in order, exactly as I had left it. No suspicious withdrawals, no mysterious transfers. I felt a spark of relief, though it was tinged with fear. If they couldn't access my finances, what was Melissa planning? It wasn't long before Daniel came by again. I didn't invite him in. I watched from the kitchen window as he approached the porch. He hesitated when he saw me, shifting from foot to foot. His expression was uneasy, as though he, too, felt the tension building between us. "Mom," he said, voice cautious. "Can we talk?" "I think we should sit outside," I said. The sunlight made the garden glow, but I kept my tone steady. Daniel lowered himself onto a chair and we sat in silence. I didn't rush to speak, waiting until the words came naturally. "I know you think Melissa is helping," I said finally, "but she's been crossing boundaries, going into my drawers, sending letters I didn't ask for. It feels like my privacy is being stolen." Daniel's eyes flicked to the ground. He hesitated, then looked up at the sky as if gathering courage. I didn't realize it felt that way," he admitted quietly. "Sometimes I think she goes too far, but I didn't want to see it." I nodded slowly, letting the words settle. Safety isn't just about bills or repairs. It's about dignity. I'm 80 years old, Daniel. I can handle my house, my finances, my life. Don't mistake my independence for weakness. He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his hands together. "I'm starting to see that," he murmured. I should have listened sooner." Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes. Melissa's calls became less frequent. The letters stopped. Daniel's tone softened. He began asking my advice on small matters instead of insisting on taking over. The relief was tentative, careful, like walking on stepping stones over a river. One evening I found myself walking through the living room, touching the frames on the wall. Daniel as a boy, his first Christmas, his high school graduation. Memories I hadn't allowed myself to feel fully in weeks. The house no longer felt like a trap, though vigilance remained. That night I lit the lamp on the bedside table and placed a cup of tea beside it. The house was still. No letters, no footsteps, no intrusions. Just the faint tick of the clock and the garden glowing softly in the moonlight. I fell asleep with the key still under my pillow, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't clutch it. The next morning, I awoke to soft sunlight spilling across the bedroom floor. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel heavy, but the calm was cautious. I knew Melissa's influence could return at any moment. I decided to check on my papers again. The metal box was untouched, just as I had left it. I opened it slowly, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility and reassurance. My hands lingered on the letters, the bills, the sealed envelope I had written to Daniel weeks ago. Keeping control over my life had become a ritual, a daily act of quiet courage. Later that day, the phone rang. I recognized Daniel's voice immediately. "Mom," he said softly. "Melissa and we want to come by just for a little while. Is that okay?" I hesitated. I didn't want confrontation, but I also wanted to see my son. "All right," I said. "Just for a short visit." When they arrived, Daniel's expression was tentative. Melissa, on the other hand, seemed to have practiced the same careful smile she always wore. But I noticed something different this time. She was slightly restrained, her movements more polite, her tone softer. It was subtle, but I sensed a shift. We sat in the living room. Melissa made small talk, complimenting the garden and the fresh bread I had baked. Daniel chimed in occasionally, but his eyes kept darting toward me, almost as if he were measuring my reactions. Then Melissa suggested something that made my stomach tighten. "Maybe, Evelyn, we could come by regularly and help organize things for you. That way, everything would be easier." I looked at her calmly. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm managing well on my own." My voice was firm, steady, but without anger. I wanted her to understand that my independence wasn't negotiable. Daniel hesitated. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to defend his wife, but he also didn't want to dismiss his mother. "Mom, I know you can handle things. Maybe Melissa was overstepping," he said carefully. "I'm starting to see that now." Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue, but I felt her presence tightening like a coil. I chose to ignore it. My priority was my son, not her pride. The visit ended without incident. They left quietly, and I locked the door behind them. Standing in the hallway, I felt the familiar ache of loneliness, but it was tempered by a sense of accomplishment. I had defended my boundaries, and Daniel had taken the first step toward understanding. Over the next few days, life returned to a quieter rhythm. I watered the garden, baked bread, and walked slowly through the rooms, noticing small details. The way sunlight fell across the table, the soft creak of the floorboards, the gentle ticking of the clock. These were ordinary things, but they reminded me of the life I had built and the control I still held. One afternoon, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a photograph of Daniel as a boy, holding a tiny kitten, smiling with all the innocence of youth. There was no note, no explanation. I held the photograph close, feeling a mixture of nostalgia, love, and relief. My son hadn't abandoned me completely. He still remembered the bond we shared. That evening, as I sat by the window drinking tea, I thought about the weeks that had passed. The tension, the fear, the quiet battles over privacy and respect. It all felt like a storm that had passed, leaving a clearer sky behind. I didn't know what the future held. Melissa's influence could return, and Daniel's loyalties could still be divided. But for now, I had regained a sense of stability, and that was enough. As night fell, I closed the blinds and checked the porch light. The garden glimmered softly under the moon, and the house felt still and safe. I knew vigilance was still necessary, but I also knew I had the strength to maintain it. The key remained under my pillow, a small token of security, but I no longer clutched it with fear. I placed it gently and let my hands rest on the bedspread, allowing myself a moment of quiet peace. I fell asleep listening to the soft hum of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the gentle sigh of the wind. For the first time in weeks, I dreamed without fear. The house was mine again, and I felt the steady pulse of my own life returning. The days that followed were quieter, but I stayed alert. I kept checking the mailbox, the front door, the porch, and even the little gaps in the window frames. Every so often I would hear a car drive past slowly and instinctively tense. But it was only the neighborhood settling into its evening rhythm. My vigilance had become a part of me, like the rhythm of my heartbeat or the ticking of the old clock on the wall. One morning I decided to take a walk around the garden. The roses were beginning to bloom, and the air smelled faintly of earth and sunlight. I noticed that the hedges were overgrown in one corner, so I clipped the stray branches, letting the soft scissors snip feel like a reclaiming of my space. As I worked, Daniel drove past and slowed when he saw me. He waved and I nodded in return. He didn't stop, but something in the way he looked, uncertain, hesitant, made me feel that he was beginning to understand the tension between us. Later that week, I received a call from Mr. Edwards, the legal aid volunteer who had helped me secure my documents weeks ago. His voice was calm, professional, but there was a note of urgency. "Evelyn, I need to remind you to keep your financial papers secure. Sometimes family members try to overstep boundaries, not out of malice, but out of misunderstanding." I smiled faintly, holding the phone a little tighter. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I've been very careful." He chuckled softly. "Good. Keep it that way. Peace of mind is worth more than anything else." After hanging up, I sat at the desk, reviewing my papers again. Bills, receipts, letters, all in order. I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing I was in control. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about protecting my life and my independence. That evening, Daniel called. "Mom," he said, voice low, careful. "Melissa and I were talking, and I realize some of what you said is true. She's been overstepping. I want to do better." I paused. It wasn't a full surrender, not yet, but it was a start. "I appreciate that, Daniel," I said softly. "I just want honesty and respect. That's all I need." There was silence on the line, a quiet reflection that felt more honest than words could describe. "I'll try," he whispered finally. The next few days, life felt more stable. Melissa's visits became even less frequent. When she did come, her movements were careful, almost tentative. It was as if she knew the house had boundaries she could not cross. Daniel's demeanor had changed, too. Less protective of Melissa, more aware of my autonomy. I felt a cautious hope that the balance was beginning to shift. One afternoon, I found a letter slipped under the door. I picked it up, heart beating fast, expecting one of Melissa's instructions or warnings. But it wasn't from her. It was from a neighbor, a simple note. "We're thinking of you. Hope you're well?" I held it to my chest, feeling a warmth I hadn't realized I'd missed. The small gestures of people who truly cared, who respected boundaries without demanding anything in return. That evening, I baked a small pie and carried it next door, leaving it on the neighbor's porch with a note of thanks. Returning home, I felt the house differently now. It wasn't a place of tension anymore. It was my sanctuary. My independence wasn't just preserved. It was thriving. I placed the key under my pillow, as always, and sat quietly, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. The house was still. Not just still, but steady, secure, and mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the tension in my chest ease. The battles weren't over. Melissa's influence could return. Daniel's loyalties could waver. But I had discovered my own strength. That night, as I lay in bed, the soft hum of the fan above me, I realized that defending my dignity required patience, vigilance, and subtle action. I didn't need drama or confrontation. I only needed resolve, quiet determination, and the willingness to stand firm in my own home. I fell asleep with the key under my pillow, this time resting my hands lightly above it. I wasn't clutching it in fear anymore. For the first time, I felt the calm of knowing I had taken control, that my house, my life, and my choices were my own. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, dust motes floating lazily in the beams. I stretched slowly, savoring the comfort of my own bed, the familiar creak of the floorboards under my feet, the soft hum of the house that had become my sanctuary. It felt like the first true morning I had enjoyed in weeks. I brewed tea and carried it to the porch, letting the warmth seep into my hands. The garden was alive with soft chirps of birds and the faint fragrance of roses. I realized that I was no longer waiting for footsteps, letters, or unwelcome visitors. The house felt steady, secure. Not because nothing could happen, but because I had fortified my boundaries, defended my independence, and stood firm without anger or fear. Later that morning, Daniel stopped by again. His tone was gentle, careful, and for the first time, truly considerate. "Mom," he began, hesitating, "I wanted to tell you. I've realized some things. Melissa, she didn't understand, but I'm starting to see what you've been saying all along. I want to be on your side." I smiled softly, letting the words sink in without rushing to respond. I could sense that this was genuine, not forced. "Thank you, Daniel," I said simply. "I just need honesty and respect. That's all." He nodded, glancing at the house, then back at me. "I hear you. I really do." Melissa, quiet and restrained, stayed back, her expression unreadable. But even she seemed to recognize that the balance had shifted. She no longer tried to push, no longer tried to control or direct my life. It was subtle, yet unmistakable. After they left, I walked through the house, touching the familiar surfaces. The wooden banister, the worn kitchen counter, the soft rug in the living room. Every corner felt like mine again. It wasn't about confrontation or victory. It was about reclaiming my life one small act at a time. I checked the metal box one last time that evening. Papers, bills, letters, all in order. The sealed envelope to Daniel, once a tool of preparation for boundaries, now felt like a reminder of the strength I had cultivated. I placed it carefully back in the box. My home, my possessions, my decisions, they were mine, and I could live freely within them. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. The house was quiet, but the stillness was different now. It carried reassurance instead of tension, calm instead of unease. I held the key under my pillow, resting my hands lightly on it, feeling the subtle pulse of security, of control, of dignity reclaimed. For months, I had navigated fear, manipulation, and subtle family tension. But I had endured. I had stayed patient, observant, and composed. I had learned that true courage didn't require shouting or confrontation. It required steady, quiet resolve and faith in one's own judgment. As I closed my eyes, the house breathing softly around me, I knew that I had not just survived the storm, but I had found peace within it. Daniel had begun to understand. Melissa had backed off, and I had reclaimed my space, my life, my voice. And in that gentle, unremarkable moment, the ordinary rhythm of my home, the soft moonlight on the porch, the quiet heartbeat of my life, I realized that dignity, independence, and calm are the truest victories we can achieve, especially in our later years. I drifted to sleep, the key beneath my pillow, a small reminder that I had taken control and that my life was, finally, fully my own.